The secret to wealth is to own nothing, control everything. Someone's going to win and someone's going to lose.
Yeah.
Death is inevitable. The question is, who do you want to win and who do you want to lose? If you do nothing, guaranteed the winner is not going to be you or your family. So if you want to take control and make sure you're doing right by your loved ones, you need to put things in place, period.
Richard is the founder of Once Wills and Trusts, a boutique legal services firm, providing advice and support to strategically protect and direct family and business wealth. We specialise in inheritance tax, estate and trust planning, including drafting of wills and risk mitigation from the loss of mental capacity.
So Richard,
Yes.
welcome to the Wealth and Business Podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I know you've driven far, to come down today.
Yeah, it was all worth it. It was all worth it.
I can imagine. So Richard, you are the founder of Once.
Yeah.
And for those who don't really know you first of all,
Sure.
what do you do?
Good question. So I like to say I help people to protect and direct their wealth. It covers quite a long or wide, remit. So effectively, education is a priority to help people understand what is wealth and why it's important to protect it, and then help them with their wills and trusts. And then if business owners who I work with quite predominantly, understand how to have an exit plan and how to transfer that wealth down to their family members and loved ones.
Very interesting, because a lot of people often think about wealth is just about money first.
Yeah.
And I always say there are a lot of other components that goes around the wealth creation aspect of it.
Yeah.
And you just mentioned will, you mentioned trust. And for me personally, I never knew what was the meaning of a trust until I kind of started talking to you over the last few years now.
Yeah.
And I never knew what trust really helps people mitigate. And it was just, for me, it was just about creating it.
Yeah.
That was for the first three years of my journey, for the first, second year, for the first year. And then I met you, and then you kind of went deeper into kind of like, oh, it's good to make it, it's good to create it. But what happens if all these different things, and then you really opened up my mind.
Yeah.
And you explained so many things. You even came the other day and you spoke to the Wealth Circle community about what it really takes to protect wealth, because the aspect of people building wealth but not actually protecting it. So what we're going to do in this conversation, because we really want the audience to kind of be filled with so much information.
Sure.
First, Black people don't like to build wealth.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
And I'm very confident in saying that, that Black people don't like to build wealth, because the statistics are there. The National Wealth Watts actually says that Black people are the rich, the poorest people on the food chain. Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. I think from a perspective point of view, it comes down to education always, because we don't know what we don't know. And we can put down.
But we have all the degrees.
But I think we're good at
qualifications,
that. Qualifications,
masters, PhDs,
and I can talk about that because I've got them, but it doesn't mean anything unless you know how to use them or leverage them. And in this country, obviously it's my own personal opinion, but I don't think they're recognised from a point of view of generating wealth, unless you're in a specific industry serving someone specifically for their needs, that your skills and qualifications lines up identical with theirs. And you probably hear it a lot. I don't know if you've read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, and most entrepreneurs and wealth people would say, the A student probably end up working for the C students. So we're very good at, some people might be very good at learning and answering exams and having the accolades, which is fine, but then to implement it, practically speaking, it's a challenge. They just can't translate. But to come back to your original point, I think it's down to just being exposed to the right information, and then seeing examples of others ahead of them, ahead of us, making it work, and sharing the knowledge as we come up. So we're pulling everyone up together. And I think we're good at that as well. When we're making it, We don't want to pull up others with us, which other communities, they do that. So, I don't go into too deep, but ultimately I notice other communities, they share a lot. You can look at any community. You go to a coffee shop, you'll see communities in the coffee shop all the time, in every area. You go to, most communities would have a doctor in there, would have lawyers in there, would have surgeons in there. So everyone knows someone who knows somebody who knows someone. And anyone who's wealthy, they say to you, look, I'm not the expert, I'm not brilliant, but I know someone who can help me. I know someone who, they're very well networked. So there's always someone who can answer their question. In our community, I'm not quite sure if it's easy to say that.
For me, I would say it's easy to say that we do know someone that knows someone. Yeah. I think the biggest problem we have as Blacks is trust.
Yeah.
We don't trust ourselves. We always we're checking you out if you're going to do something bad to us.
Yeah.
And then that goes interstate, right? The government have to then determine, who gets what, if there's an equity,
exactly,
or rather if the mortgage is actually paid off completely, who gets what.
Exactly.
Now, the children of the deceased never gets that wealth being passed to, because there wasn't appropriate structures for that to happen when that person died, or there wasn't insurance to pay off the debt or the mortgage for the equity to be released to the children. So wealth actually never get passed down to, the soul, our community. So the wealth never get passed down.
Yeah.
So as an expert, first let's go to the root. Why people never really have this education.
Where do I start? For me, it's a school system. If I be honest, I think it's by design. It is by design. And so we have to think outside the box and not follow the narrative. That's the real. That's my personal experience. And then it's the schooling system. So, for example, most people, I imagine, will send their children to private school, not because it's a better education from in terms of the syllabus, the subjects, English, maths, etc. But you're networking, your connections, and so therefore you're exposed to more. So you'll learn more, and then you'll see more. So that's important. So I think it's down to education. Our school system does not teach financial education. That's by design. So therefore, how are you supposed to learn? You go into certain jobs, even in the finance industry, and you're only taught what you need to know. You do the financial exams, you're only going to get taught what they want you to know. And I learned it the hard way. So you have to expose yourself, or deliberately want to expose yourself, or be fortunate enough to be in a family or have friends who understand the name of the game, or who've had experience of passing down wealth generationally, to continue passing that baton on. So until that narrative is changed, it will stay the same. And so that's really my mission, is to change the narrative and through education.
So as a wealth protection expert, so let's break this down in steps. So first of all, for the average person who's not even an entrepreneur, they have a full-time job. If they're to go on a wealth protection journey, how does that look like for them? Talk us through that.
First of all, you got to define, what is wealth? Because it's relative. A lot of people joke and say, I don't need you, I don't have any money, which I think that's, if you're living in London and you have, if you have a life insurance policy, you own a house, or you're due to inherit something over £325,000, then the government will perceive you to have enough money, else they're going to tax it. Okay? So for someone who, as you say, maybe just on a full-time job, you're building up assets in some form. Maybe you've bought your first home, because that's a dream for many people, whether you're in London or wherever you are in the country. And then over time, you build up equity in that property, just by the nature of inflation and nature of demand and supply, etc. You will achieve some value in that property. Now, over time, your wealth will accumulate. That's just the natural progress of how things work. You age 30, you might not have much. Age 60, you've accumulated some form of wealth in one way, shape or form, whether that's through pensions, whether that's through life insurance, whether that's through inheritance, whether that's through businesses, etc. Now, no one really thinks about, what happens. They don't want to think about death. Unless they've experienced it. Either a friend has passed away, or a loved one's passed away, and they've realised, things were not in place, I better do something about it, because it's not a very good experience. But ultimately, once someone defines what wealth is and why it's valuable, and then also why they want to pass it down to their children or to their loved ones, and it's not just money, it's control, okay? So when I say control, I'm talking about if you have young children under the age of 18 and God forbid the parents pass away, who do you want to raise or have parental rights over your children? And we assume it goes to their godchildren, if it's our community, God family, godfather or godmother. But that's not the case, or goes to my mum or my sister or whoever it might be. That may not be the case. And even if it is, do you believe that your family members will raise your children with the same love and attention and guidance as you personally would? So that's wealth. Your family is your wealth. So who will look after your children, number one? Number two, if, God forbid, you have an accident and we're no longer able to speak for ourselves to have enjoy the lifestyle and the welfare that we want and we're used to enjoying, someone else will dictate that on your behalf, namely the state or local authority. Is that what you want? Now, the question, most people say, I didn't know that. So if I say to people, well, there's no such thing as a next of kin over the age of 18, most people are not aware of that because it's not taught. If it's taught, it's through a very bad experience. And so it's trying to wake people up to say it's not just about money per se, it's about wealth in terms of your family, about provision, about their provision, and protecting what you have. And if you don't, well, I say this, wealth is not how much money you make, it's how much you keep. So everyone can accumulate wealth during their lifetime. I did.
Yeah.
And I lost it. And I realized, well, what's wealth then? If you can make loads and lose loads, what's wealth? Being able to protect it and have control over it is a whole different ballgame. So wherever you are in life, I don't care if you're, as you said, someone in a job, working, building up your career, or whether you're an entrepreneur in business and you've got millions in the bank, etc. Knowledge of how to protect the wealth is super, super, super important for various instances of either how to pass it down, who you don't want it to go to. In this country, unlike the rest of Europe, divorce and the matrimonial laws are, I think maybe I say archaic. So naturally, no matter who's at fault, because there's a no fault rule, half your wealth is going to be transposed sideways or to families that you may not even get on with. Are you happy about that? And most people like no. Or if the main breadwinner passes away for whatever reason, and they've got a house and cars and savings, and then the wife or the widow remarries, and there's no provision in place, and there's children, those children could potentially be disinherited, even by design, because there's lots of predators out there who would see the wealth and prey on vulnerable people, and that wealth is gone for whatever reason. And it happens quite often. People don't see it much or hear about it in the news. So when you start to realize what's important to you, whether it's £100 in the bank or £1 million in the bank, if you don't have any idea of what's going to happen to that, or it's not going to go in the direction that you think it's going to go, i.e. passed down to your loved ones, then you need to do something about it. And if it's not written down, then someone else will basically make the decisions on your behalf. Wow. That's deep.
I'm sure a lot of people listening to this right now, we've had a conversation on level. A lot of people, listening to this right now will probably feel like, okay, their explanation of wealth would have, most people's definition of wealth is always money first.
Yeah.
I've had a series of conversations in my life. I've been opportuned to have had a lot of conversations in my life and sit in so many rooms. When people hear about wealth first is money, and then gradually distribute so many other things. But your very explanation here is no, wealth is at some point in time, you would have accumulated something, whether that be money, whether that be your children, whether that being your career, pension. Obviously, there's so many angles to look at it. So yes, if we have now been able to establish that wealth accumulation through different categories, and in the distribution of that wealth, at some point it needs to be protected. And in the protection of it is something that a lot of people are not aware of it. So protection of your wealth is, for example, if you have children below the age of 18, what happens to those children? God forbid the worst happen. Say you're in a plane, the plane crashes tomorrow. Your children is your wealth because you've left them. What happens to them? Who protects them? Do they go to the wrong auntie's custody? or the wrong uncle's custody?
Exactly.
What if the children also choose to do something opposite? You know, what then happens? You know, and yes, I'm from Africa, born, bred in Nigeria, and usually it is the truth. This happens a lot where if a man dies, you know, and the woman remarries, and the woman remarries to a bad husband. The bad husband turns the children of the deceased father into, you know, something else. You know, maybe a very wealthy man. All right, he dies, he leaves so much money. The woman marries the wrong man. The man comes, he squanders the money, turns the children of the father who did the hard work into maids,
Right.
drivers,
Right.
cleaners, you know, and actually punish them where these children's future gets completely destroyed. Because, for example, there wasn't a will of what happens to those children and then what happens to the resources, you know, and naturally because people are very scared, you know, of saying, I remember when I first started discussing putting a will together for myself, and somebody said, but you're so young, why are you putting that? Why are you even thinking about it?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I should be thinking about it now because I always believe, you know, one of my mentors told me, said, the day you realize your destiny, which is that there is one destiny that's guaranteed. I said, what is that? My mentor said, death. It's the destiny of every human being. That the truth that and this is something that people never agree to tell themselves. The truth is that you're going to die.
Exactly.
So if you know you're going to die and you've already prepared for it by actually making sure that your children who are innocent below the age of 18 cannot actually make decision of their own, you know, is protected. Who do they go to for education fees? Who do they go to for well-being? Who do they go to for advice? Somehow you end up raising children that will be, you know, have to hear from the government. And to be honest, would the government really raise your child? Well,
Exactly.
they wouldn't. So having established that fact that, okay, wealth protection is what wealth protection means. You know, the wealth is your children, the wealth is the money, the wealth is the inheritance, the wealth is basically that generational legacy. Why is this something that is not discussed enough within? I'm going to really tailor this around Black people. Let the truth be told. Black people don't like wills.
Okay.
Black people don't like life insurance. I have in the past seen people that will say, even though they have life insurance, their wives, their husbands are not aware of it because sometimes they feel like if something happens, you know, the next person wants to take them out so they can claim that insurance. I've seen all different kind of conversations. Let's make this real. Richard, how can people overcome all these barriers and actually plan, all right, whilst they're here, whilst they are gone, and how do you help them?
Okay. So you raised some good points. And okay, if we're going to focus on Black people just specifically, people don't like to talk about death. It's like, as soon as you mention death, it's like, you know, you're jinxing something. It's a stigma or you're putting something on them. And I'm like, well, and I can understand, but that's not the case. You know, especially if you're in this country, you got to start thinking about long term. And I think it's hard, especially the older generation where the wealth, you know, the baby boomers, there's a lot of wealth with our, you know, parents and grandparents in their 60s and older who have houses or have cash, you know, just sitting there, maybe not doing much, and unfortunately it's squandered, or you know, the children are like ready to receive it, to spend it. They've already spent it in their minds, so that this whole generational thinking has not been embedded. And I'm not speaking. That's not everyone, but probably generically speaking, that's probably the case. So I always come down to education and the willing to want to understand. But there's a problem, but you don't know what you don't know. That's what I'm finding. And so when you start to educate or provide the information, the next stage I'm finding is the willingness to want to invest more in it. And then the cost of the investment is not always cheap.
No.
And I find it even with families who have like properties and a modicum of wealth. But when it comes to mention the word will, it's like, oh, £150. When I say no, it's nowhere near that. They like look at me like I'm scared, but you happily pay the taxman £15,000 for stamp duty, or capital gains tax or whatever it might be. But you could have just avoided that with just spending 1% of your wealth on protecting 99% of it. So I think it's a lot of it is. I always keep repeating myself: education, number one. Number two, it's if people don't know, there's a problem. And I find most of the people who want to take action, it's because they've experienced something negative. So it's happened to someone else, or it's happened to someone there in their family. They've seen that there's a problem that could have been avoided. They didn't listen the first time around. It's like, okay, you know what? I better do something now because I don't want it happening to me. And so then because of a negative situation, they're keen to put things right. Whereas if we could just go from the point of understanding how the law and how the rules just work, we would just put things right in the first place. Why wait for something wrong to happen? Why not just learn from previous mistakes, just as we're doing everything else in life, and put the right things in place early enough so that there's no problems down the line? Just like a savings plan. So when you talk about protection, and it's funny when you say that people don't want to mention it because they feel that someone's going to take it away from them or end them early. That's why I deal with trusts and specialize in trust, because the secret to wealth is to own nothing and control everything. Okay, in this dispensation of how we operate with finances, ownership is not the best thing. Yeah, control of wealth is the best thing. And so once you understand the difference between ownership and control, then you can put the right things in place without having to worry about someone trying to end you early or whatever it might be. So for example, whether it's a business, whether it's a trust, or whatever vehicle that we might decide to use, if you're able to make the decisions, but you don't necessarily own it because it's not in your name personally, then you can't tax it, you can't take it. If you can't tax it, you can't take it, then you got no problems. I always use the analogy, you got a nice big mansion and maybe you have a daughter, and, young guys that seen all of this nice cars outside the front and the big house, and think, oh, yeah, I'm going to marry this girl, I'm going to walk into wealth. And then they get married and they have a conversation, and the daughter says, well, it's not mine, it's not my mum and dad's. We just live here. So what are you talking about? You just live here. It's not mine. And then you might do a bit of research and realize on land registry, it's got nothing to do with the mum and dad's name. It's nothing on there. Can't find any history around, who actually owns the property specific to the daughter and to the parents. And lo and behold, because it's in the trust, they don't actually own it, but they can enjoy all the benefits and live as if it's theirs. And so if you understand that concept, you don't have to worry about people trying to take things away from you because it's not yours. You see a lot of people going bankrupt and they're still living life as a king or queen. Why? Because there's a rules in place, there's things going on that they understand about the difference between ownership and about control. So I think if we can just educate people more to understand how the rules of the game works in this Western world, then we can play the game better. And at the moment, the rules that we're being taught are not in line with the game that's being played. That's probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah, I remember the first time we had this conversation, I was blown away. I'm like, yep, Richard, come on, get this done for me. So let's break a few things down there. You kind of spoke a little bit about inheritance there, and you spoke about trust. So let's kind of deconstruct a little bit. What does inheritance, tax or inheritance mean? And again, what is a trust? Obviously, we're talking about a trust here in order to literally mitigate tax liability. Now, so for those who are listening right now and they're not quite sure, what does an inheritance tax mean?
Yeah.
First, what damage does it cause, and why do you need to protect yourself against it? And then we'll move on to a trust as well. What is trust? Why should you even set it up in the first place? And what's the purpose of it?
So inheritance, simply put, or inheritance tax is if you have any modicum of wealth, once you're over the age of 18, at the moment the law states £325,000. And if someone passes away with that type of wealth, anything in excess of that amount of money will be subject to, in this country anyway, to tax. And the amount of tax is actually 40%.
So 350K?
325,000.
325K.
Anything in excess of that,
the government will take 40.
Yeah. So for example, if your pension's worth £1 million, when you pass away, or when if Fred passes away tomorrow, he would have nominated, well, I want that £1 million to go to my spouse or to my children or whatever it might be. So the children may inherit that money as a pension or as cash. Now, if they inherit that money as cash, then it's the same thing. It's another generational situation. It's wealth.
They will have to. They have to pay that tax.
Well, it'd be taxed already.
Okay,
so they'd receive it. Just say they receive a lump sum, whatever. Because I don't want to get too technical, but let's just say they receive 75,000. Or if it's £100,000 for argument's sake, let's say they receive 75,000 in their hands.
Yeah.
But that's £75,000 now in their personal estate. So if you make that £1 million and they receive £750,000 in their personal estate, that's £750,000 cash in their bank account. They are now subject to the inheritance tax if they pass away.
So they will there will be a 40% on that 750K.
Yeah, if they die and they do nothing with it, unless they spend it all, it'd be taxed. So we call this generational inheritance tax.
Wow.
So we've got to plan how to transfer wealth free of tax.
So that you don't get hit by that 40% given to the government.
Yeah. I mean, someone put it like this: being a custodian of wealth, raising up your family members, even if it's just one person who's the most astute financially, to protect the family wealth from generation to generation to generation, because that's pretty much how the wealthy do it.
On a nutshell, at every given point in time, if we don't have the appropriate structures, yes, say for example, my father died, gives me £750,000 inheritance, and which is already being taxed, right? You're saying because it's a pension, all right, and the £750,000 wouldn't need to be taxed by the government at 40%. However, if it's then given to me in cash, if I don't do any sort of protection around me, all right, and get someone like you to kind of help me out, and God forbid something that happens to me, right, then what happens is that the £750,000 that I have, all right, 40% kicks in. Yeah. And I can't pass it across to my son or my children.
You can. During your lifetime, it's your money, right? So you do whatever you
But if I don't protect it, I'll be hit by... Yeah, if I don't protect it, I'll be hit by 40%.
Yeah, effectively, yeah.
So on a nutshell, 40% plus maybe if I was already doing business, I would have been obviously paying 20% tax. Again, if I hit the threshold of over £50,000, which means I would have been taxed on actually another 40% again. Okay. Because the threshold of income, if you're earning below 50,000, you're paying 20%. Yeah. If you're earning above 50,000 pounds, and part of the reason why a lot of people are kept poor, by the way, because they don't want to earn above £50,000 because they don't want to pay 40% tax. And which is one of the reasons why Section 24 was introduced. The government introduced Section 24. If you're earning £50,000 already, and if you then go and build a property portfolio and you earn another £50,000, that's £100,000. You're charged 40% on the new £50,000 income. So on a nutshell, you're not literally making money, even though you think you're making money. Well, this is obviously deep now. All right. So part of the reason why you need to be speaking to Richard, so he teaches you how to protect all of this. So now my next question is is the trust. So what is a trust?
So a trust is the simplest way I can put it is a device, a conceptual device that will allow you to utilize the law. I won't say manipulate, but utilize the law such that you can separate two different types of ownership. Okay. So in law, okay, I'll just stick to the UK. We own something. So let's say I borrow your phone for a second.
Yes, please.
So this is your phone and you own it. You have a receipt for it. Now that receipt will basically say that you have the title to this phone. Whether anyone can see the phone or not, you have title to it. So if you did go shopping wherever you shop, whatever supermarket you shop, and the alarm goes off, they don't ask to see the trolley, the first thing they ask you is, where's your receipt? Where's the proof of ownership?
Yeah.
Okay? So that's what we call our title. With a house, we're in property, same thing. How do I know you own the house? Here's my title. Now, that title in this country is divided in two ways. Beneficial and legal.
Legal.
Now, by default, it's wrapped up in one. And we just call it full title. So with knowledge, you say, right, well, how do I just separate the beneficial part, the enjoyment of this asset? Let me just use the phone. But when it comes to paying the bills, just like our children, Daddy, can you pay the bill, please? So they have the beneficial use of the phone and we have the legal use of the phone, right? We have to pay the bill.
Take my phone.
And we can take it back. And we dictate. So I might say to my daughter, well, you can only use it between the hours of 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. You can only spend this much amount of money per week. So I've laid down the rules as a legal owner. And as a beneficiary, my daughter, she'll use the phone. And when it comes to pay the bill, it comes back to me, the legal owner. So if we understand this concept, well, that's how law works, hence it's not taught in schools. Maybe not many solicitors even understand this, to be fair, unless they specialise in the area.
No love. Specialist area, isn't it?
It is quite specialist. So ultimately, now we can manipulate that and say, right, I'm going to set up a trust and I'm going to now write it down to say that the beneficiaries are these people and the legal owners are these people. And they may be the same, they may not be the same. And then we're going to put this property in this construct called a trust, which now defines legal title and beneficial ownership. And from that area now, the trust owns the assets, and then it has officers that have their parts within this construct. Just like a business, you got the directors, you got the shareholders, and then you got the customers. Yeah, similar type of scenario. So that hopefully I've explained a basic element of trust. I think the best. One of my favorite scriptures is Matthew. I think it's Matthew 17, and Jesus basically, Jesus and Peter walk in, and it's time to pay the temple tax. So you're probably familiar. I'm sure you are familiar with that scripture. And so I'm paraphrasing, but effectively, the tax guy is saying, you got to pay the 2 denarii coins, and Jesus says to Peter, so who's supposed to pay the tax? Is it the sons of the kings of the earth? Or is it the strangers? And so Peter said, well, no, master, obviously it's the strangers that have to pay the tax. So Jesus said, well, since that's the case, why are we, who are the sons of the kings of the earth, paying tax? But lest we offend them, let us pay. So what Jesus is demonstrating is, we're the owners of this world. We own it. If you're the owner, you don't pay the tax. If you're a landlord, you don't pay the tax. The one who's renting the property pays you. Yeah. So there's a reason why we're paying tax. So ultimately, the point I'm trying to make is that was a first trust, because Jesus didn't go into, he's a rich man, right? So he didn't have to go into his own vault. He didn't go and say, Peter, go into my vault and get 2 denarii coins. Peter was a fisherman, and he said, you go, the first fish that you see, you take 2 coins out of its mouth and pay the tax. So that was the first trust. So Jesus and Peter were the beneficiaries, okay? The tax man was obviously collecting the tax. And Peter was the trustee, because he had to go and do the work. He had to go and actually pay the tax man. He communicated with the tax people, negotiated, etc. So that's the definition of the first trust, if you understand the construct of a trust. So you've got someone who sets it up, who owns the asset, someone who benefits from the asset, and someone who has to administrate the asset.
Wow.
Sorry, I don't have to be too technical.
Yeah.
I can talk all day about trust, but I'm trying to make it a reality in people's minds.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of why, we have you as an expert within the property wealth education structure. And as well as we're bringing you on this podcast, so you can, share a little bit about it. It's deep. These are things, it took me a long time to understand, and a lot of people are buying assets and accumulating assets. They don't even have it to trust. And I remember the first time we had a conversation about how big do I want my property portfolio to go? And I basically say, I don't know if you remember when I said, my vision is to build in this country, within the next 10 years, which is out there anyway. It's part of my mission statement that by the year 2023, we want to hit £100 million in assets. And I remember, you basically said, okay, 100 million pound in asset, but what is the exit?
Mm-hmm.
And that was, a big eye opener for me. So for people who are like me, who like, okay, let me build 100 million pound in asset. Oh, actually 100 million is too big. Let's say 10 million. You have a 10 million pound in asset. Your debt level is 50%, your equity is 50%. So which means you owe the bank 50% of that money. 5 million bank is owed to the bank, 5 million pound appreciation, or maybe deposits that you put in accumulation of it. So, and then that asset of 10 million, let's say is generating 1 million pound a year net. How does a trust become beneficial to that kind of structure?
Okay, so I'm hesitating because it's not as straightforward as that. But to keep it really, really simple, assuming let's ignore the laws.
Yeah, but just before before you actually explain, I just quickly drop this in so that it's when you actually give the answer, so it can be very well understood by the audience. The smart property investor would obviously set up a structure, a structure when you start to make that sort of money. So you mitigate, tax on your income. You mitigate against capital appreciation in the future as well. So obviously this is why they say the rich get richer. The rich keep getting richer and they keep accumulation. They keep accumulating wealth, accumulating wealth. Whereas the uneducated investor will own that 1 million pound and pay tax on 1 million. It's all mine. And then obviously the assets keep keep appreciating. So which means even if you sell, you exit at 10 million and you pay the debt of 5 million back, and then you have 5 million left now. So you'll be taxed on the 5 million pound that is left. So again, that would be over 40. I mean, that would be approximately 40%.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And and you've hit the nail on the head. Okay. We got to understand that there's different entities in law. We've got individuals, as you mentioned already. So the tax rate for an individual is not the same as the tax rate for a corporation. The tax rate for a trust is different to the tax rate for a corporation. The tax rate if you are living abroad is not the same as if for tax rate for someone who is living in the UK. That's where you find most wealthy people have residences all over the world, and et cetera, et cetera. So you got to start to either have advisors. You must have advisors. The wealthier you get, the more lawyers you're going to need ultimately to help you. So to answer your question, if an individual was to accumulate 10 million pounds, and 5 million of that is in their personal name, they're going to have problems. Because to help that individual, unless they're prepared to invest at least 1%, 2%, 3% of that wealth to protect it, and their age is young enough that they got the time to do it, to make it work, this is where the problem comes in. And when I speak to people like that, they're in two categories. Either they're switched on and they know they need to spend money to make money, or like they can't see the value in spending some money, and so then they don't realise that they're challenged. Or even though you can explain to them until you're blue in the face, they think they can get it cheaper elsewhere. But ignorant people, yes, that's the problem I see. So some people are happy to spend. I speak to millionaires and it's not a problem to spend 20, 30, 40, 50 grand to protect 10 million pounds, okay? But some people are like, why would I pay you that kind of money? But you'd rather spend, 300, 400, 500,000 pounds in tax? Do you understand? But people don't get it. So it's being business savvy, the wealthier you get as well. It's not just about the accumulation. So if I explain like this, one of my early mentors said there's 5 facets to wealth. I think I might have mentioned it in the podcast before, in the training before. You need to have the ability to make money, manage it, okay, protect it, leverage. If you don't understand how to make money, you're stuck. If you don't know how to protect it, you're stuck. If you don't know how to leverage it, you're stuck. And the last one is having access to the right information. We talk about intelligence. We talk about intelligence. I like my spy movies, and it's all about the right intelligence. You get the intelligence wrong, it's all over, okay? And so you have to be able to master all 5 of those areas: making money, managing money, protecting money, leveraging money, and getting access to the right education. So you are an education specialist as well as a property specialist. People are doing well because they're happy to leverage their time and energy to learn from you. They're investing in themselves to get the right education, to get the right knowledge, okay? They are buying the right properties. They're doing whatever that you're telling them to do. They're learning from that. And so now it's like, well, how do you protect all this wealth as we go along? If you can't major in those 5 areas, then technically speaking, are you truly a wealthy individual? And so to answer your question, anyone who's in that bracket of 10 million, 100 million, whatever it might be, even if you can't do it yourself, you've got people surrounding you that can guide you in the right way. So you'd rather pay, let's say 10% of your wealth to smart people and write it off, by the way, for tax, than try and be a cheapskate and then lose 40% altogether. Does it make sense? And that's not just inheritance tax. I'm talking about your exposure to being sued, your exposure to all, just to protect the assets, like how money was created in the first place, or what we know as money now. We use notes because walking around with gold and silver bars was dangerous. You couldn't walk from town A to town B with, 10 kilograms or 10 pounds of gold or silver because you'd be susceptible to be robbed. Whereas a note folded up, who's going to find it or who would understand the value of that? It's the exact same concept. If you don't understand how to protect what's yours, you're going to lose it. The other side of it is someone who's savvy would have other structures. So they wouldn't have it in their own name. They'd have their own businesses, and those businesses have share structures. Yeah. And those share structures would be probably put in other entities that can't be taxed or even found.
Yeah.
So that's how their wealth is protected. So on paper, they literally are broke. But the wealth, if they say, well, I need £1 million tomorrow, their lawyers would know what to do.
Yeah. And that's why the wealthy people always get wealthier, isn't it? Because let's be honest, wealthy people mitigate tax a lot. So obviously there's 2 things they say, right? Avoidance of tax or evadance.
Evading and avoidance. So
it does evade, yes.
Yeah.
Evading and avoiding.
So evading is illegal. Avoidance, the new word now is mitigate.
Yeah. So the new word is mitigate now, but the tax avoidance is a crime. Right?
But
if you avoid, is it evasion or avoidance?
Evasion is the crime.
So evasion is a crime. So if you don't want to pay tax at all.
Or you're doing something dodgy to not pay it.
To not pay it. But you can mitigate.
Whereas avoiding, in the old sense, was planning in the right way, within the rules. You can bend it so much, but not without breaking it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's allowed.
Yeah.
It's legal.
Yeah.
And interesting, this is one of the reasons why I borrow a lot. And people don't, which is the mitigation part you spoke about. Okay. All right. You spoke about leverage and mitigation. People don't understand that when you leverage, the more you leverage, the less tax you pay. Because when you leverage, imagine, I'll use an example, buy, refurbish, refinance, one of the most interesting property strategy out there. If you buy an asset, and the asset goes up in value. So for example, you buy an asset for £100,000, you don't work to it, now it's worth £300,000. If you sell it, you take note of your cost, you take note of the purchase, rather the investment, all right? And if you sell it, say for example, the investment was 100, the cost was 100, and now you have £100,000, which is profit. You're going to pay tax on the 100,000, which would be £20,000. 20% tax. Yeah. Now, if you leverage against it, which is instead of selling it, if you go to the bank and say, "Dear Mr. Banker, can I have a loan on this 300,000," and the bank agrees and gives you maybe 80% loan to the 300,000, you've actually just leveraged, and you can actually release all that money, and then obviously your tenant in the structure you mentioned pays the rent, month in, month out. You've just had access to a huge cash injection that you will not pay tax on. However, if you were to sell it, yes, you're going to have similar amount of money, but you're going to give away 20%. In the tax structure which we're mentioning here, if you fiddle your book not to pay that £20,000 and you get caught and found out, you've just committed a crime. Yeah. Because you are meant to pay 20% of that money. Yeah. All right, which is £100,000. That would be what, 20K. All right, and because you fiddled your book, you're going to have issues. Yeah. But if you legally leverage that money, all right, the same money comes into your bank account, but nothing to pay.
That's what you're saying. You're learning the rules of the game, and you're playing it. Yeah, and that's all we're trying to say. What are the rules first?
What are the rules first?
So we can play it better.
And who are the professionals guiding you?
Exactly.
you know.
And that's the problem. We're trying to play a game that we don't know the rules to.
Yeah.
And to answer your original question, people don't want to invest in themselves to learn the rules or invest in others to help them play the game better in the first place. And that's the problem.
What is a will then?
So the will is a trust, but it only comes alive when someone dies. It's your last written testament. It's like what you want to see happen when you pass away. So if it's any assets that you own, who do you want it to go to? You know, in what capacity? Is any provisions around the gift that you want to make to those people? So, for example, you own a house together. Husband and wife, own a house together. Let's say your husband passed away first, and he says, "Well, depending on how the house is owned, which I won't get into too much detail, but ultimately, do I want my wife to still stay there? If she remarries, should they still stay there? What happens after my wife passes away? Does the house get sold? Do the children have it? Do we just divide equally?" Ask questions to find out what they want. Some people have very specific wishes, like heirlooms to pass down generation to generation, etc. But ultimately, it's your wish or your wishes that you are putting down in writing to see it passed on and being activated or implemented. And so your voice is being heard when you're no longer around.
So it's interesting you say your voice is being heard when you're not around, which is the will. Now, in bringing all these three together, have I missed anything else that in your wealth creation journey or wealth protection journey? So first you have to go on the journey of creating wealth, and then you have to go on the journey of protecting it. Is there anything else that that anyone that is embarking on this journey needs to be aware of, apart from the fact that, yes, we spoke about the insurance part, which is a different kind of conversation. We've had an episode on that. And in the new year, we're going to be coming back to just basically enlightening people the reason why they should get protected, which is insurance. And then the reason why the protection of the actual distribution of the wealth, which goes into inheritance tax, trusts, and as well as a will. Is there any other pillar that the audience needs to be aware of that we've missed?
Yes, mental health. So, because the will only becomes active when someone dies. A trust is normally specific to a particular type of asset. But what happens when someone loses their mental capacity in order to voice what they want? They're no longer able to be taken seriously because
they have mental issues.
They have mental issues, but they're in a house worth £10 million and no one knows what to do with it, or no one has the control to sell it, or the court needs to make a decision because the individual no longer has the power to do so. And then the challenge is the family members are suffering because nothing can be done because the person who can make the decision is not legally compos mentis to do so. And that happens in your personal finances, but also in your health decisions. As I said, there's no such thing as a next of kin over the age of 18. So a medical practitioner could veto a spouse or family decision to not do something without an instrument in place to say the family have the final say. For example, I remember on one of my TikTok videos, I was talking about the same topic, and she goes, her daughter, the doctor switched off the life machine because the boyfriend told the daughter to do so. They didn't listen to the mother. The boyfriend, she's not even married. And so the machine was switched off and the boyfriend say so rather than the actual family say so. Because the doctor can choose or decide to veto the decision of the family if they want to. Same with a local authority. If someone's having care, needs some type of care, for example, whether they're paying for it or the council's paying for it, if this instrument's not in place, the local authority could decide, well, we want you to live in that care home. That could be very horrible and not very nice. And the family don't like the food that's being utilised, or they believe they're not being looked after very well. And the family say, I want them to live at home. But the local authority said, we don't want you to live at home. And the family can't do anything because they don't have the necessary legal documents in place to make that happen.
So, interesting what you just said right there. We're also saying that we can protect ourselves from what happens should we become mentally incapacitated.
Yes.
All right. That's
That's correct,
incapacitated, that you can actually protect against that. To say this is exactly what happens if I am unwell, or if this happened, if that happened. Now, does that mean that can't just happen naturally? So, for example, let's just say I'm unwell, I can't talk, situations happen. My wife can't just make an instant decision on what happens. How can people really start literally putting things in place, especially being in a country like this where rule of law?
I think it's important. I think everyone over the age of 18 should have a will, because a will is just a piece of paper on the face of it. Yeah, I look at it like going to a nice restaurant. Some people might start with dessert. I'm a 3-course man. Yeah, that's probably obvious. But the bottom line is this: you decide what you want, what you need to fulfill your appetite and for what you need for your circumstances. Same with a will. You can have a very standard will because the situation doesn't warrant a complex will. But ultimately, you need a document that states for every part of your life journey, because our stages of life takes place. You're single, you get married, or you have children, you get married, then you own property, or you start a business, you get into partnership with a business partner, you start having other types of assets, etc., etc., etc. So that will could be thin or thick. Bottom line is it's doing something to make your life and your loved ones' lives easier. So I don't care. Once you hit the age of 18, I think everyone should have a will. 2/3 of the population do not have one.
Yeah, two-thirds of the population do not have one, and 90%. Statistics: 90% of Black people
don't have anything.
Don't understand what is an inheritance tax. 90% of Black people don't understand trust.
No.
90% of Black people don't actually have a will.
Yeah. And the challenge is, what I'm finding more and more, and it's very frustrating. In fact, Mr. Forbes was talking about this with his advisor. I don't hear many specialists talk about probate in the right way.
Yeah.
Now, probate is basically the government's ministry to prove your wealth, so that is inheritance tax due or not, before the wealth is transferred to your beneficiaries. It's not just a straightforward, like in Europe, it's an immediate, it's a process. And if you have a mortgage on the property, for example, the rules changed, I think, 2013, where every debt must be satisfied before the certificate called a grant of probate is issued. So in other words, the beneficiaries cannot actually access the house have it in their name or get the keys to sell it or anything else without this document called a grant of probate. And the grant of probate cannot be issued or will not be issued unless all debts, inheritance tax, mortgages, any other debts are satisfied. Now we've got this vicious cycle. Say like you've got a house of equity in it, that you need to sell the house to pay the mortgage off. But no solicitor in the land will sell a house unless they can prove that you have the right to sell it. So if someone dies, the only thing that tells you got the right to sell the house is a grant of probate. So no one will buy your house, so you can't pay the debt off.
Yeah.
But if you can't pay the debt off, you can't get your grant of probate. So you're stuck in this purgatory situation, locked in for years, can't do anything at all, unless now you have to borrow externally, finding someone to do that. And that's very specialist as well, because if you borrow the wrong way, there's more inheritance tax to pay than normal. And so people don't understand that's why insurance and what Adrian's doing is so important. Having, the way I see it is risk mitigation. Just assess the risk in anything you're going to do and try and put the right provisions in place to make it work. If you don't invest in the right education to get that, there's going to be problems. And when we talk about, I'd say my Black clients, a lot of them have been misadvised because unfortunately my industry is unregulated. So you can have someone who's probably just maybe made retirement, do a 2-week course, and they're a will writer. That doesn't mean to say they understand estate planning.
Yeah.
Do you understand? So there's things that they don't know. And so the advice you're going to get is, all you're looking at is, how much is a will? 150 quid, I'll get it. but you haven't been told what you should be told. So I'm speaking to clients in their 60s, 70s, 80s and said, what, you spoke to, and even solicitors, unfortunately. So you spoke to this solicitor and you're trying to tell me they didn't explain inheritance tax to you, knowing that your value of your property is X, knowing your wealth is Y. No one explained this to you? No. Now, the argument could be, well, was it because the person says, I just want the cheapest will, so I'm not going to explain these parts?
Yeah.
Well, and I'm like, well, no. If you're going to sit in front of me, I'm going to let you know what you need to know. And then you make an informed choice. If you want a £150 will, fine. But you can't say you didn't know.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. You got to get yourself in front of the right people and don't let money be the deciding factor as to who you're going to speak to.
So the government will give you a will.
Yeah.
And then that allows them to take the 40%.
They'll do what they want.
Or they'll do whatever they want.
Well, it just doesn't, if your circumstances is one thing and the government will, because you didn't write your own, is opposite to what you would have personally would have liked to seen happening, it can cause a problem.
So let's close this conversation with this case study, because I don't want us to give too much away today, because you're going to be coming to do more. And as well as, for those who wants to kind of reach out to you, the link to Richard's appointment calendars will be somewhere around the show notes, by the way. So Richard, let's just say the worst case scenario. Someone owns a property, all right? They've got a mortgage of £500,000. They got an insurance of £400,000, okay? Or actually, the mortgage is £400,000.
Yeah.
All right? They have a insurance of £500,000.
Yeah. Life insurance.
Life insurance.
Yeah.
Okay. And they don't have a will.
And the
all right?
property's worth how much?
They don't have a trust.
Yeah.
Okay. And the property's worth £1 million.
Okay.
What happens
So
if they don't have a wealth protection strategy in place should the worst happen?
So the assumption is worst case scenario.
Yes.
That means that the life insurance is not in any kind of trust. So what will happen is, the government would say, the first, assuming that they're single, the first £322,000 will be passed to, well, assuming they're married, so the first £322,000 will be passed to their spouse. Yeah? When I say married, they have to be married. If they're not married, then everything will go down to their children. If they don't have children, everything will go to either mum and dad if they're alive, or aunts, uncles, half-brothers, step-brothers, down the line, and then down to King Charles. That's the government will. So the question is, if you don't want your wealth to go to your siblings, or you don't have any, and let's say your parents are not alive anymore, and let's say you don't get on with the rest of your family members, will you be happy for that wealth to go to them? Now, if you are married, the first £322,000 out of that million that you mentioned, because you got life insurance plus the equity, I think it's about £1 million roughly, only the first £322,000 goes to the spouse. Most people think everything goes to the spouse, not unless you say so. Yeah? Then the rest is split 50-50 between the spouse and the children. If the children are under 18, that's a big problem. Let's say the spouse wants to move, they can't because the children are under 18 and they have a say. But the people, they would have a trustee in place, and that trustee may not be the spouse. So it gets complicated, it gets messy. And then if the wife, let's say how properties are owned is another problem. Most people own their properties in joint names. So if one person dies, 100% of the asset goes to the surviving party, which is a problem. So let's say that was a scenario. I mean, it's a worst case situation, and that spouse remarries, and it's a divorce. Your hard work, and you just passed away, that spouse remarries and then divorces with no will, everything goes, or half of it goes to the new spouse. If the spouse dies, 100% of the wealth goes to the new spouse. The children have nothing unless the new spouse decides to honor the deceased person's children. And they've got a blended family. So I know I've just created something almost out of nothing. This is what happens when you don't have your own will. It becomes messy. Everything's tied up. No control. People can potentially lose out. And then it spirals out of control because the date of death is a date of death. and let's just say this is a mess for 5 years, and the house and the date of death was worth $1 million, and in 5 years' time in London it's worth 1.5 million. Do you know when the inheritance finally worked out that the beneficiary will have to pay capital gains tax on that increase? Because of the mess that the parents didn't sort out before. So it just gets worse and worse and worse. So that's what I'm trying to say. I know you started with a very simple concept, and it can end up infinitely messy just because of everyone's situation is different. Everyone's circumstances is unique. People from different backgrounds, different scenarios, different situations. And half the stuff I've not even mentioned. So it's so imperative to get the right advice.
Wow, Richard. I think as we go throughout 2024, it's going to be exciting because there's a lot coming through. On the Wealth Creation University, we are going to be putting a mini program in there for people to listen so that they can be able to, have a consultation with you. I know your consultation is not free, by the way, because there's a lot of Q&As and a lot of things that go through. So Richard can actually tailor your one-to-one situation, whether you are a professional, civil servant,
doesn't matter,
property developer. Wealth protection is wealth protection.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but it's tailored. One word, Richard, before we finish this episode on this podcast. Why should anyone right now pay attention to this topic that is very difficult? This conversation we've just had is a very difficult conversation.
Yeah.
Death, protection, what happens when you're not here, what is tax mitigation, what is the trust, and it's a very tactical conversation, though we've tried to make it very simple. What is that one thing that you want the audience to take away from this?
So it's a deep question. You heard the term zero-sum game? Zero-sum game.
Some game.
So when you invest in the stock market, someone's going to win and someone's going to lose.
Yeah.
Death is inevitable. The question is, who do you want to win and who do you want to lose? If you do nothing, guaranteed the winner is not going to be you or your family. End of story. So if you want to take control and make sure you're doing right by your loved ones, you need to put things in place, period. You guys, you heard it from the Mr. Once himself. All right. Make sure you reach out to Richard. So Richard, I think I missed this part. So just quickly tell us about Once. Yeah. So I mentioned it earlier. The secret to wealth is to own nothing, control everything, which is what Once, it's an acronym, it stands for own nothing, control everything. History-wise, because of my own personal circumstances, historically I realised that trust and being able to ring-fence your assets is the key to protecting yourself. And that's why I understood. The story of Once is basically, I think it's the Rockefellers. I think it was David Rockefeller. He had like $300 million in a year. This was over 100 years ago, so it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the journalist said, how do you make that money and not pay one single penny of tax? And he said, well, the secret to wealth is to own nothing and control everything. And from the time I read that article, I never looked back. Wow.
And guys, get used to his face. He's going to be, popping up a lot within the community and as well as within our education program. And again, it's going to be every quarterly. We're going to be hearing an episode from him, just kind of give you guys an update, different things around your wealth protection. It's one thing to create wealth, is another to pass it down, is another to protect it. And here is the expert. Richard, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
For being here, and looking forward to seeing you soon. I'm so excited for those who are in the community and to our listeners.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.